How did people in ancient Egypt survive extreme heat? You'll be shocked when you learn the truth. For thousands of years, the civilization of ancient Egypt flourished in one of the hottest and driest places on the planet. Where modern humans rely on air conditioning and refrigerators, the ancient Egyptians had nothing but their own wits. They didn't just survive under the scorching sun. They built colossal pyramids, created great art, and ruled a powerful empire. Their methods of combating the heat were so ingenious in their simplicity that we can still learn from them today. It was not a war against nature, but the subtle art of cooperation with it. The secrets of the Egyptians were woven into every aspect of their lives, from the architecture of their homes to the contents of their plates. Watch the video to the end to learn how ordinary clay pots worked more efficiently than modern refrigerators, and why Egyptian wigs were actually an ancient head cooling system. What I am about to show you will completely change your perception of ancient Egypt. The fundamental secret to the Egyptian survival lay in their worldview. They did not see heat as an enemy to be defeated, but as a given that they had to learn to live with in harmony. Their entire culture was built around this principle. They observed nature, the behavior of animals, the movement of the sun, and the flow of the Nile. These observations formed the basis of their technologies and daily habits. Their approach was proactive rather than reactive. They did not wait until it became unbearably hot to seek refuge in the shade. They built their lives from the outset to minimize the impact of the heat. This was evident in everything from the choice of building materials to the daily routine. They intuitively understood the laws of physics that we study in schools today. Their inventions were the result of centuries of trial and error. They realized that the key to comfort was not to create artificial cold, but to effectively manage existing heat. They learned to slow its penetration into their homes, reflect it, and use it to their advantage. This approach required a deep understanding of the environment. With our technologies, we often try to isolate ourselves from nature. The Egyptians, on the contrary, sought to become part of it, using its own laws. They created a sustainable system that worked for thousands of years. Instead of expending enormous energy fighting the climate, they directed it toward creation. This principle allowed them to free up resources for building a great civilization. They understood the value of water not only as a source of life, but also as a cooling tool. Every jug, every canal was part of a huge climate control system. They created an oasis in the middle of the desert using only clay, water, and knowledge. This philosophy, not struggle, but adaptation, is the main, most shocking secret of their survival. They did not conquer the desert. They negotiated with it, and therein lies their greatest wisdom. I'm very interested to hear your point of view. Do you think modern society can learn something from this ancient approach? Or is our technology the only right solution? What if I told you that everything you believed about the primitiveness of ancient buildings is not true? Egyptian houses were true masterpieces of engineering, designed specifically to combat the heat. Their secret lay in the materials and unique construction. The basis of construction was adobe bricks made from Nile silt and straw. This material had high thermal inertia. Walls made of such bricks heated up very slowly during the day, keeping the interior cool. At night, when the desert cooled down, the walls slowly released the heat accumulated during the day. This created a comfortable microclimate inside the dwelling around the clock. The windows in Egyptian houses were small and located high under the ceiling. This minimized direct sunlight. Hot air, which is lighter than cold air, rose and escaped through these small openings. Cool air from lower levels replaced it. This created a constant circulation of air masses. The ceilings in the houses were made very high. This also helped the hot air to accumulate at the top, away from people. The space near the floor remained the coolest place in the house. Many wealthy homes had courtyards with small pools or fountains. As the water evaporated, It significantly cooled the surrounding air. This principle of evaporative cooling was one of the key elements in their arsenal. Flat roofs also played an important role. During the day, they served as an additional barrier to the sun, and at dusk, the whole family could climb onto the roof to sleep under the open sky in the cool air.
Beautiful.
I wish we could.
Some buildings were equipped with special structures known as malkaf, or wind catchers. These were directional ventilation shafts that captured the cool north wind and directed it into the rooms. Thus, every element of an Egyptian house was not random, but part of a unified, well-thought-out passive cooling system. How effective do you think such a system was compared to modern ones? But architecture was only external protection. In the next chapter, we will learn how the Egyptians cooled their bodies directly with the help of unexpected accessories. I will reveal the most closely guarded secret of Egyptian fashion, which has nothing to do with beauty. When we think of ancient Egyptian wigs, we imagine elaborate hairstyles worn by the nobility as a symbol of status. But their main function was completely different and much more practical. Most Egyptians, including priests and nobles, shaved their heads. This was hygienic and helped prevent their heads from overheating under the scorching sun. Wigs were made from human hair or plant fibers. Their complex structure created an air layer between the wig and the scalp. This layer acted as a heat insulator, protecting against direct sunlight. Moreover, this design provided ventilation. Air could circulate freely, cooling the scalp. This was much more effective than wearing one's own long, thick hair. Wealthy Egyptians could afford wigs impregnated with beeswax and aromatic oils. In the heat, the wax slowly melted. This created an additional cooling effect and spread a pleasant aroma. Another element of the Egyptian look was the famous black eyeliner made from antimony or galena. We are used to thinking of it as a makeup item, but its main purpose was not cosmetic. A thick layer of black paint around the eyes absorbed the sun's rays. This significantly reduced glare and protected the eyes from the bright desert light. In essence, these were the world's first sunglasses. Thus, the two most recognizable elements of Egyptian appearance were not decorations. They were functional tools for survival in an extreme climate. Fashion and practicality were inseparable in their culture. They turned their bodies into the first line of defense against the heat. Their clothing, hairstyles, and cosmetics were part of the same adaptation system as their homes. It was a comprehensive approach to survival. This unique combination of hygiene, fashion, and engineering is strikingly effective. The Egyptians found a way to look majestic while feeling comfortable in unbearable conditions. They proved that smart solutions can also be beautiful. Are you ready for the shocking truth about what the Egyptians wore? The basis of their wardrobe was not just fabric, but a real technological material created by nature itself. We are talking about flax, which was much more than just a material for clothing for the Egyptians. Linen has unique properties that make it ideal for hot climates. Its fibers can absorb large amounts of moisture while remaining dry to the touch. This allowed sweat to evaporate from the skin's surface, cooling the body. Linen clothing was light and loose. It did not cling to the body, creating an air gap. This promoted constant air circulation and prevented overheating. The Egyptians preferred white or light-colored linen. These colors reflect most of the sun's rays, unlike dark colors, which absorb them. The structure of linen fabric is also important. It is smooth and lint-free, making it pleasant to the touch and non-irritating to the skin. In conditions where the skin is constantly sweating, this was very important. The Egyptians achieved incredible skill in processing flax. They knew how to produce both coarse fabrics for workers and the finest, almost transparent linen for the clothes of pharaohs and nobles. This fine linen was known as woven air. The clothing itself had a simple and functional cut. Men wore loincloths called shenti, and women wore straight dresses called kalaziris. This minimalism was dictated not only by fashion, but also by necessity. The loose cut did not restrict movement and provided maximum ventilation. Such clothing was comfortable for working and moving around under the scorching sun. Linen was so important that it was even used for ritual purposes. Mummies were wrapped in linen fabrics, believing that the purity of this material would help in the afterlife. It accompanied Egyptians from birth to death. Thus, the choice of fabric was not accidental. It was a conscious, technological choice based on centuries of observation. But what did they drink to replenish their fluids? In the next chapter, you will learn about a drink that was both food and medicine. To survive in the desert, you need to constantly replenish your body's fluid reserves. The Egyptians, of course, drank a lot of water, since the Nile was always nearby. However, their main drink, which quenched both thirst and hunger, was beer. But it was not at all the beer we know today. Ancient Egyptian beer, or henket, was thick, cloudy, and low in alcohol. In terms of consistency and nutritional value, it was more like liquid porridge or kvass. The process of making it was simple. Barley or wheat bread was made into crackers, which were then soaked in water and left to ferment. The result was a nutritious and refreshing drink. The low alcohol content meant that it could be drunk in large quantities without the risk of intoxication. It effectively quenched thirst and restored the water-salt balance. This was especially important for pyramid builders and workers. In addition, beer was very nutritious. It contained carbohydrates, B vitamins, and beneficial trace elements. For many poor Egyptians, it was an important part of their daily diet, sometimes replacing food. The fermentation process also killed most of the harmful bacteria that could be found in water. Thus, beer was a safer drink than raw water from the canals. It also served as a means of preventing intestinal diseases. Beer was such an important product that it was often used to pay workers and officials. The standard daily wage for a pyramid builder was several flatbreads and several liters of beer. This drink was a real liquid currency. In addition to beer, the Egyptians drank freshly squeezed juices. Grape and date juice were especially prized. These sweet drinks not only quenched thirst, but also gave the body quick energy. Drinks based on honey and various herbs were also popular. These refreshing mixtures were invigorating and toning. Thus, the Egyptians had a comprehensive hydration system. It included plain water, nutritious beer, and energy juices. They understood that in the heat, the body needs not only moisture, but also support in the form of calories and vitamins. What if I showed you a time machine and we looked at the plate of an ancient Egyptian? His diet was perfectly balanced for life in a hot climate. Intuitively or consciously, the Egyptians chose foods that helped the body cope with heat stress. The basis of their diet was plant-based foods. Vegetables, fruits, and grains are easier to digest than heavy and fatty foods. The digestive process itself generates heat, and light foods minimize this effect. The Egyptians grew large quantities of moisture-rich vegetables. Cucumbers, lettuce, melons, and watermelons were regulars on their table. These foods not only nourished the body, the main source of carbohydrates and the basis of the diet was bread. It was baked from wheat or barley. Bread provided the energy needed for hard physical labor. Protein was obtained mainly from fish caught in the Nile and legumes, such as lentils and chickpeas. Meat, especially fatty red meat, was rarely eaten, mainly on holidays. Such a diet was much less heating for the body. Dates were both a treat and a source of quick energy for the Egyptians. They are rich in potassium, which is washed out of the body along with sweat. Eating dates helped restore electrolyte balance. The diet also included a lot of onions and garlic. We know them as foods with antibacterial properties. In a hot climate, where food spoils quickly, this was an important means of preventing food poisoning. The Egyptians preferred to eat small portions throughout the day. The main meal was often in the evening when it was cooler. This allowed them to avoid additional heat stress during the hottest period of the day. They understood that proper nutrition was not only a source of strength, but also a tool for thermoregulation. Their diet was light, rich in moisture and nutrients. It helped them stay active and healthy under the scorching sun. How did the Egyptians keep all these foods fresh without refrigerators? In the next chapter, we will reveal the secret of their amazing clay air conditioner. Ready to learn more? In a world without electricity, keeping food fresh and water cool was a top priority. The Egyptians solved this problem with a simple but ingenious device based on the laws of physics. The secret lay in the special composition of the clay from which the jugs were made. It was not completely waterproof. The evaporation process requires energy. The water took this energy in the form of heat from the walls of the vessel itself. As a result, the vessel and its contents cooled significantly. The temperature of the water in such a jug could be 10–15 degrees lower than the ambient air temperature. In 40-degree heat, this meant cool, refreshing water. This simple device worked around the clock without any cost. The same principle was used to store food. Food was placed in one clay pot, which was then placed in another, larger pot. The space between the walls of the pots was filled with wet sand. The outer pot was covered with a wet cloth. The water from the sand and cloth evaporated, cooling the inner pot. Vegetables, fruits, and dairy products. This device, known as a zir, is still used in some regions of Africa and the Middle East. Its effectiveness and simplicity are unmatched. It proves that complex problems do not always require complex technologies to solve. The Egyptians placed these clay vessels in drafty, shady places. The movement of air accelerated the evaporation process. This in turn enhanced the cooling effect. They intuitively used a fundamental physical principle, the same principle by which our bodies cool down through the evaporation of sweat. They simply transferred this model from the human body to everyday objects. Thus, with the help of ordinary clay, sand, and water, they created an effective cooling system. It was accessible to everyone, from the pharaoh to the simple peasant. The easiest and fastest way to cool down in the heat is to use water directly on the body. The Egyptians perfected this method. They turned ordinary wet fabric into a personal climate control system. During the hottest hours of the day, they would wet their linen clothes with water. Evaporating directly from the body, the water created a powerful cooling effect. This allowed them to continue working even under the scorching sun. The loose fit of the clothing promoted air circulation. This accelerated evaporation and made cooling more effective. The wet fabric turned into a kind of air conditioner. At night, when the temperature dropped slightly, many Egyptians slept on the roofs of their houses. There they spread out mats and covered themselves with sheets soaked in water. The light night breeze blowing over the wet fabric created a comfortable coolness for sleeping. This method was available to absolutely everyone. It required nothing more than water and a piece of fabric. It was the most democratic way to combat the heat. Slaves working on construction sites constantly poured water not only on stone blocks, but also on themselves. It was not only a matter of comfort, but also a matter of survival. Even in the homes of the nobility, this principle was used. Floors were often sprinkled with water to cool the air in the room. The air passing through these wet barriers was cooled and humidified. This created a pleasant microclimate inside the house. The Egyptians understood that controlling humidity was just as important as controlling temperature. In the dry desert climate, evaporative cooling works most effectively. They took full advantage of this. Their approach was comprehensive. They combined architectural solutions with personal cooling methods. This created a multi-level system of protection. It is impossible to talk about survival in Egypt without mentioning the main artery of this civilization, the Nile River. It was not just a source of water and food. The Nile was the heart of the entire Egyptian climate control system. The annual flooding of the Nile saturated the land with moisture. This created a fertile layer of silt, but also affected the microclimate. Evaporation from vast areas of wet land cooled the air in the river valley. Most Egyptian cities and settlements were located along the banks of the Nile. Proximity to a large body of water created a cooler and more humid environment. It was a natural buffer that mitigated the harsh desert climate. The Nile was the source of water for all methods of evaporative cooling. Water was taken from it to irrigate floors, wet fabrics, and fill clay vessels. Without the Nile, these technologies would have been impossible. The river also served as a natural air conditioner. The wind blowing from the surface of the water was always cooler than the wind from the desert. The Egyptians built their houses to catch this river breeze. The Nile gave life and vegetation. Thick papyrus thickets and palm groves along the banks provided shade. These green areas were natural oases of coolness. The river itself was a place where one could find refuge from the heat. Bathing in the Nile was a daily practice for many Egyptians. It was the simplest and most effective way to quickly cool the body. The Nile determined the entire rhythm of life. Agricultural work was tied to its floods. This cycle made it possible to avoid the hardest work during the peak of the summer heat. Thus, the entire civilization was built around the river. The Egyptians did not just live near the water, they integrated the river into all aspects of their lives. Without the Great River, the history of Egypt would have been completely different. Perhaps this great civilization simply could not have emerged in such harsh conditions. The Nile was not just a river. The last but not least important secret to the Egyptians' survival was their daily routine. They did not try to work against the sun. They built their lives around its movement across the sky. The working day began very early, with the first rays of the sun. The morning hours were the coolest and most productive. They tried to do most of the heavy physical work before noon. When the sun rose to its zenith and the heat became unbearable, it was time to rest. It was a kind of siesta. People hid in the shade of their homes, did light work, or simply slept. This midday break was vital. It allowed the body to recover and avoid overheating. Trying to work at this time would not only be ineffective but also dangerous to life. Work resumed closer to evening when the heat began to subside. The evening hours became a time of activity again. The working day was thus divided into two parts. Everyone followed this rhythm, from peasants in the fields to craftsmen in workshops. It was dictated by the climate itself. It was impossible to ignore it. Even the builders of the Great Pyramids followed this rule. They did not work under the midday sun. Their work was carefully organized to take weather conditions into account. Meal times were also part of this routine. A light breakfast in the morning, a main meal in the cool of the evening. This helped to avoid putting additional strain on the body during the peak heat. Social life also came alive at sunset. Evenings were a time for socializing, celebrations, and gatherings. The cool of the night provided an opportunity to relax and enjoy life. Thus, the Egyptians did not just live in a certain climate, they lived in its rhythm. They learned to be most active when nature allowed them to be. This wise synchronization with the environment was the key to their success. We can see that the survival of the ancient Egyptians in extreme heat was not a miracle, but the result of a complex and well-thought-out system. It covered all areas of life, from architecture and clothing to food and daily routine. Each element of this system was simple, but together they created an incredibly effective mechanism for adaptation. The Egyptians taught us an important lesson. Sometimes the best solutions are not complex technologies, but a deep understanding of nature and the ability to live in harmony with it. Their legacy is not only pyramids and temples, but also invaluable experience of sustainable living in a harsh climate. This ancient wisdom remains relevant to this day. Which of these ancient methods would you like to try or do you consider useful even today? Suggest topics for future videos that you would like to see on our channel in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on new research into the secrets of the past.